Marc Volovici is Alfred Lanker Lecturer at the University of Haifa's Department of Jewish History. He is the author of German as a Jewish Problem, the Language, Politics of Jewish Nationalism at Stanford University Press, 2020, and the co-editor together with David Feldman of Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and the Politics of Definition by Palgrave Macmillan, 2023. Marc previously served as the Leverholm Early Career Fellow at the Birkbeck Institute for the Study of Anti-Semitism, University of London. In 2019, Marc co-edited the catalogue of the award-winning exhibition Jews, Money, Myth, which was staged at the Jewish Museum of London. Please.
Hello, everyone. So the prominent Israeli poet and writer Yehuda Amichai is not an easy subject for historians. He kept no diary, published no memoir, and his archive begins only at the age of 30. While autobiographical elements permeate his work, they are not easily extractable into a coherent narrative. This difficulty is compounded by Amichai's complex relationship to his German childhood. He was the son of an Orthodox Bavarian family who left Würzburg in 1936 when he was 12 for mandatory Palestine. Amichai typically described his migration in organic terms as someone who had already been rooted in Jewish concepts, who knew Hebrew fluently, and therefore merged naturally into life in the Yishuv. In a 1971 interview, he asserted, "From birth I knew I was Jewish. I knew I didn't belong to the German people. What shocked most German Jews in 1933 didn't happen to me." This sharp separation of Jewish from German identity helped eventually establish Amichai's status as a quintessential Israeli poet. Since the opening of the Yehuda Amichai archive at Yale, several scholars, such as Nili Sharf-Gold, Natasha Gordinsky, and others, have examined Amichai's relationship to Germany. While they disagree about whether Amichai consciously downplayed German influences on his writing and self-understanding, there is no dispute that Germany held a certain weight in his inner world. His papers contain unpublished drafts of poems in German, bilingual notes, and copious correspondence in German. His literary work contains numerous German cultural references, and as several scholars have shown, Amichai remained connected to the German language and literature well into his career in Israel. So this paper examines Amichai's German question through a somewhat unique text, his 1978 essay, Mein Judentum, which is the only autobiographical essay Amichai authored. Written in German for German readers and not translated into Hebrew during his lifetime, his essay deals primarily with his German childhood in first person. This context allowed Amichai to formulate his relationship to Germany differently than in his Hebrew writing. In what follows, I examine Amichai's account of his childhood and demonstrate how his attempt to extract a distinctly Jewish existence from his German environment reflects both internal divisions within European Jewry and Israeli critical attitudes towards Jewish diaspora life. In particular, Amichai frequently contrasts his forefathers' Orthodox German customs with those of other Jewish communities, thereby reinforcing the purported authenticity of his childhood feelings while simultaneously engaging with broader political charges and controversies. In this sense, I'll argue, Amichai's effort to reconstruct a pure perspective of childhood obscures the steady presence of politics in his account. I will draw on historian Amos Funkenstein's concept of the dialectic of assimilation in Jewish history. Funkenstein argues that Jewish historical writing often describes authentic, autonomous Jewish existence in isolation from broader environments and assimilatory trends. However, the very notion of an authentic Judaism is itself shaped by non-Jewish influences across historical periods. As Funkenstein writes, Jews expressed and still express their uniqueness through modes of speech borrowed from their environment. Amichai's perception of his Jewishness can serve to exemplify this insight. Amichai's essay originated as a radio program broadcast in March 1978 in West German radio station, Süddeutscher Rundfunk. The broadcaster invited Jewish intellectuals to describe their Jewish identity and its influence on their work. The program and ensuing book of essays reflected growing West German interest in Jewish culture and identity. After years when public engagement with Jewish matters was considered too sensitive and receiving either silence or philosemitic framing, in the 1960s and 70s, Germans showed increasing interest in German Jewish history, the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and contemporary Jewish life. Amichai's essays moves between three temporal spaces: his German childhood, his arrival in Israel, and the present. He presents his upbringing within a, quote, very religious Orthodox family rooted for years in southern Germany, and describes his grandparents as rural Jews with farms, cattle and fields, fruit and vegetable orchards, horses and even carriages, servants and maids. He said they observed Jewish law without hesitation or doubt. He defines their Judaism as innocent, almost childish in simplicity. To characterize this Judaism, Amichai emphasizes its difference from other Jewish streams. He writes, "This wasn't the learned Judaism of Eastern European yeshivas. No dialectical controversy with the past existed there. No logical philosophizing about the future. This was unconscious, practical, quotidian Judaism, without philosophy and science, without Geigel and Buber and Rosenzweig and their like, as one had in Western and Central Europe. I remember all this vividly from my childhood days." Of course, the child Amichai didn't experience what his Judaism was not. The contrast with other German Judaisms was projected retrospectively. This contrast reveals Amichai's subtle ideological stance and the unresolved tensions with other forms of Jewish life in Germany and beyond. Though Amichai distanced himself from religious observance at 15, the text shows an aspiration to defend German Jewish orthodoxy's image. His depiction of his family and community includes several patterns of post-Holocaust German Jewish Orthodox autobiographies. As historian Guy Miron argued, immigrants from these communities tended after the Holocaust, quote, to present their Jewish environment as natural, deep, and rooted, highlighting Jewish communal and familial belonging symbols. However, most of them feel that this description doesn't suit most German Jews, so they emphasize their family or environment was an exception, thereby criticizing most assimilated German Jews. This fits Amichai's depiction, despite his mature distance from Orthodox observance. Amichai's Jewish world, as reflected in this essay, presents a form of physical, authentic Judaism, an alternative German Jewish ethos to the familiar narratives of German Jewish culture. He addresses his relationship to Germany by reconstructing how he imagined biblical stories within childhood spaces. He writes, "Not far from Würzburg, a channel opened between forested hills. For me, it was the valley of Elah, where young shepherd David defeated giant Goliath. The fact that later on school trips I saw the real valley in Israel doesn't undermine at all the image that remains deeply imprinted in me." He concludes, "For me, Judaism and Jewish history took place on German soil. The whole world was Jewish without knowing it. I knew it." But immediately after this description, Amichai shifts temporally, offering a diagnosis from his Israeli viewpoint. Similar things were experienced by other Jewish children in Eastern Europe against Russian and Polish landscape backdrops. Isn't it grotesque that the most devoutly Orthodox Jews walk around in the Middle Eastern Israeli climate wearing Cossack fur hats and long Eastern European kaftans? Amichai's comparison and somewhat mocking tone allegedly point to similar dynamics of Jewish integration across the diaspora. However, this juxtaposition contains a built-in asymmetry that conveys distance, if not disdain. While Amichai's integration into southern German landscapes carries a dreamlike character, poetic innocence, and rich childish imagination, ultra-Orthodox Jews wearing black suits and fur hats in Israel are merely replicating their historical integration within the Russian Empire. While Amichai's naivety is childish and heartwarming, Eastern European Jewish naivety is grotesque because it is performed by Jewish adults even after the destruction of their communities in the Holocaust. According to this comparison, the Haredi continuation of diasporic habits is in some ways a sign of immaturity. Amichai views his past as composed of a shielded Jewish circle within which he lived and the non-Jewish world surrounding it. His Jewish world revolved around Jewish institutions, a Jewish kindergarten, elementary school, seminary, and hospital. These, and especially his parents' home, served as an inner circle, as he put it, protecting him from the broader circle's threat. He writes, "In my childhood, active Judaism was almost always associated with the hostile surrounding world. Therefore, I lived quite naturally within two worlds, both completely real. I felt foreign, other, and different, but also felt very good in beautiful Würzburg. The perception of a protected Jewish world obscures the fact that Orthodox Jewish community institutions were themselves products of German Jewish Orthodoxy's encounter with emancipation and Germany's modernization into a nation-state. In Jewish educational institutions, pupils studied mandatory German curriculum subjects alongside Hebrew, Bible, and Talmud, using German pedagogical methods. After 1933, Jewish schools were required to teach racial theory in accordance with Nazi educational principles. While this does not diminish the unique characteristics of Orthodox rural German society, describing it as protected capsule of authenticity presents a partial and rather naive picture. He writes, "My Jewish world was completely protected and whole. Therefore, when the Nazis came to power in 1933, the feeling of otherness and difference wasn't foreign to me and caused no shock. I was completely aware of the non-Jewish world surrounding us. I felt its hostility even before Hitler. We experienced almost daily stone throwing and calls like dirty Jews." Amichai explains that precisely these feelings of foreignness and hostility strengthened his deep Jewish belonging. But his illustrative example again shows how biographical memory interweaves with historical judgment. He writes, "My father always carried the prayer book proudly, always wrapped himself in a talit, and during Sukkot walked straight back through the streets carrying palm branches." Here Amichai turns toward those who behaved differently amid anti-Semitism. He writes, "And there were also Jewish residents who wrapped all these Jewish traits in paper to hide them, so as not to provoke rishus, which is an ancient Jewish word meaning anti-Semitism. This concept, rishus machen, taken from German Yiddish, touches on internal Jewish debates about dealing with anti-Semitism and whether one should hide public Jewish affiliation markers. Amichai's father's unapologetic Judaism contrasts with assimilationist German Jewish approaches, believing that the display of external Jewishness might provoke anti-Semitism. This echoes both Orthodox and Zionist criticism of German Jews for allowing fears of anti-Semitism to shape their public behavior and self-perception. Amichai's conception of diasporic existence moved thus between two poles, ideal Judaism and the hostile world. This popular perception of diasporic Jewish existence echoes a lachrymose narrative of Jewish history, as historian Salo Baron called it. In Amichai's essay, this perception gains a confirmation from being presented through a child's viewpoint, allowing Amichai not to challenge his innocent perception with additional knowledge and context. At the same time, at certain points, the adult Amichai emerges with additional contrasting examples that serves to validate the child's perspective. Describing his family's arrival in Petach Tikva in 1936, Amichai recounts a relatively easy experience of immigration, partly thanks to Hebrew fluency learned in kindergarten and school. Quote, "So I wasn't forced to overcome difficulties and complications that immigrant children usually encounter." At the same time, Amichai remembers attending a Petach Tikva synagogue along with members of a religious community which his father helped establish. This community, he writes, continued praying in an old colonial house according to German Jewish religious custom. In this synagogue, Rabbi Dr. Wolf from Cologne delivered his words in German, thus creating again an island, although the surrounding world now included only Jews. Through this anecdotal detail, Amichai points out a deep historical irony. The German language, the same language in which Hitler delivered his first speeches, was for me the language of Judaism, while the holy language itself became the secular language of the surrounding world in the street, the language of games and sports, work and agriculture. Thus, after describing the sharp separation between Jewish and German worlds in his upbringing, the German language emerges as a component that undermines this very distinction and echoes the long and rich history of Jewish life within the German language, a history that includes the history of German Jewish Orthodoxy as well. In this sense, Amichai appeared as part of a broader German Jewish story, however much he sought to distinguish himself from it. Amichai's view of Jewish diasporic life distills an intimate, authentic Judaism and connects it to generational chains of Jewish existence characterized by warmth and a strong sense of community. This perception distinguishes autonomous Jewish culture from an alien, hostile culture whose main value lies in its pleasant landscape. However, as Amichai continues presenting his childhood Judaism, we encounter what Amos Funkenstein called the dialectic of assimilation. At its core, Amichai's self-perception and view of Judaism are revealed as products of long-term interaction between Jews and the surrounding culture. Only when Amichai addresses spaces that distinctly connect Jewish and German existence in modernity, the German language itself, does a recognition emerge of the layered German-European modern foundation of Amichai's Jewish world and the German language's central place within it. Describing his upbringing, Amichai emphasizes how deeply certain sights and experiences remain engraved in his memory. He doesn't question memory's limitations as a means of describing the past or as a tool for self-formation. He doesn't present broader or more critical views of the religious Judaism in which he was raised, nor does he mention the reasons that ultimately led to his departure from religion. Amichai seeks to recreate a narrow, innocent child's viewpoint and let it stand. But simultaneously, he turns toward other parts of the Jewish diaspora, where he displays more distant, critical approaches that incorporate historical and ideological perspectives. Adopting the child's perspective allows Amichai to construct narratives of authentic Judaism while obscuring their German components. This perspective also marks the role of ideology in his autobiographical narrative. On the one hand, Amichai presents German audiences with an image of Judaism that is non-threatening, natural, and integrated into German physical space. On the other hand, he establishes positions rooted in Zionist and Orthodox critiques of diasporic Jewish existence. Through the child's ostensibly innocent gaze, Amichai achieves what might otherwise be impossible, the simultaneous performance of assimilation and critique thereof. Thank you.